We only used artists that were great visual storytellers. They could conceive of what a panel should look like better than the writer could. For instance, I as a writer might say, I want a long shot of these two characters walking down the street. The artist might figure, it'll be better if I draw a window of a building with their reflection in the window. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So leave it to these guys, because they were geniuses. Remember, I was working with guys like Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, who created Spider-Man with me, and he did Doctor Strange with me, Kirby, who did the Fantastic Four and the Hulk, and so many others, and as I said, Colan and Kane and Romita and Buscema, and the people who know comics hearing me say this, they're probably genuflecting right now at the mention of those names.
I think that...
And again, a lot of credit goes to Jack Kirby. All I did was describe what I wanted and how I wanted him to act and be. But when Jack drew him, you couldn't get a better looking villain than Dr. Doom, with that little cowl over him and the armor. And Jack always used to say, Stan, the reason he concealed his face is because he basically looked like you. Jack and I sometimes had a relationship like the Thing and the Human Torch.
I want to wish Jack a happy birthday. This is a hell of a coincidence. I'm in New York, and I was tuning in the radio, and there I hear him talking about Marvel, and I figured, well, I might as well call and not let this occasion go by without saying many happy returns, Jack.
Well, Stanley, I want to thank you for calling, and I hope you're in good health, and I hope you stay in good health.
I'm doing my best, and the same to you. You know, you were talking earlier about your drawing, and people sometimes criticized your figures and so forth. I always felt that the most important thing about your drawings, I remember when I was a kid and I first saw Captain America, it wasn't the correctness of the anatomy, but it was the emotion that you put in. To me, nobody could convey emotion and drama the way you could. I didn't care if the drawing was all out of whack, because that wasn't important. You got your point across, and nobody could ever draw a hero like you could. And I just want to say, without getting too saccharine, that one of the marks, I think, of a really true great artist is he has his own style. And you certainly had, and still have, your own style, and it's a style that nobody has even been able to come close to. And I think that's something you can be very proud of, and I'm proud of you for it.
I have to thank you for helping me to keep that style, Stanley, and helping me to evolve all that. And
the other character that I liked was called the Silver Surfer. I worked with an artist who was the greatest, named Jack Kirby. I don't think my stories would have looked as good if Jack hadn't done some of them, because he was brilliant. In fact, all the artists were brilliant. There was John Romita and Steve Ditko and John Buscema. I was the luckiest guy alive, because I think I could have done a mediocre story. They made them look as though the stories were great, because they were so beautifully drawn. One thing we used to talk about, I remember when I first started working with him, I used to say, you know, Jack, we want our stories to look exciting. Now, the stories won't look exciting unless the characters in the stories look excited. So let's never have anybody with a poker face, with no expression. Let's have the characters either look worried or scared or happy or excited or nervous or something, but there should always be a definite expression so that it looks like something exciting is going on. Well, I didn't even have to tell him that, because he did that naturally. And if you look at any of the pages he's ever drawn, you could see it always looks as though something interesting and exciting is going on. I think Jack would have made a wonderful movie director. But I was always lucky that way, and I was always working with such talented people.
Yeah.
Again, as Jack Kirby, John Romita, Steve Ditko. I mean, my God, any idea that I had, they made it look like it was 10 times better because they drew it so well. So I was lucky. One of the reasons that these stories have seemed as good as they might have seemed is because of the way they were illustrated. I was the luckiest guy in the world to work with artists who not only could draw well, they all drew well. All the artists in the business draw well. But I worked with artists who knew how to tell a story the way the best Hollywood director would structure a story. I worked with people like Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, John Buscema, Gene Colan, John Romita, Gil Kane. I'm forgetting a million of them, I'm sure. But they were all so good that they took the story, the concept that I had, and they made it look so exciting that when you saw the pictures, you just had to read you had to stumble through my words to enjoy the pictures. So every one of them were great. I couldn't say who was the best or who was the worst. There were no worst. They were all terrific. Oh, I see what you mean. No, I don't draw them. What I would do is come up with the idea. Then I would choose what who I thought was the right artist, and we would get together. I would tell him what I wanted, and we collaborated. At that time, we had an artist named Jack Kirby, who was really the best around. And he did the Fantastic Four with me, and he did the X-Men and Thor. When I came up with Spider, and he drew very heroic things. When I wanted Spider-Man, I said to Jack, I wanted him to draw it. And I said, Jack, don't make him look too heroic. I want him to be kind of a nebbishy kid, you know. He's an ordinary kid. But Jack is so used to drawing everybody to look like Captain America. When I saw the drawings, I said, no, that isn't what I want. And Jack didn't care. He had a lot of other things to do. And then I called Steve Ditko, because he had a more simple style. And Steve did it, and it was exactly what I had in mind.
Perfect.
So I worked with Steve, and that's how it all happened. And I forgot what the question was. I hope I...
One of my all-time favorite stories that was illustrated by Steve Ditko was the Spider-Man story called The Final Chapter. Peter, or Spider-Man, found himself trapped in a subway tunnel with some huge something, a big piece of iron that was holding him down, and he couldn't escape without lifting that off him, and it looked as though he would be trapped there forever. I never realized that Steve would draw it so magnificently. Instead of doing it in a couple of scenes, a couple of panels, like perhaps most artists would have done, Steve stretched that out for a number of pages where you keep seeing Spider-Man straining and forcing himself and trying to lift that huge iron object, but he just couldn't do it. But he didn't give up, and panel after panel, page after page, he's trying to free himself, and finally he does. And when he does, after the reader had seen all those other panels and pages, it was such a thrill, even to me, and I was the writer of the story. When I saw that, I almost shouted in triumph. Steve did a wonderful job on that.
Well, did you work closely with Jack? You had on so many other projects.
Couldn't have done it without Jack. Jack was the most imaginative person I have ever known. He was not only an artist, but he was a storyteller. And he told the stories visually through his drawings. And for example, when we first created the X-Men, and I said, I want them to be at a school, we'll have a professor. The name of the professor will be Professor Xavier, because I'm so corny. I said, that'll tie in with the X of X-Men. And Professor Xavier teaches them how to handle their superpowers and everything. And Jack brought in the first few pages, and they're all fighting each other, which is a wonderful way to start a story. But I said, what are they fighting about? And he said, no, they're exercising. I decided they should have a room where they exercise. I thought that was great, so we decided to call it the Danger Room. But I never would have done that unless Jack had given me those drawings, you know? So he was the greatest collaborator you could ever have. Up until then, the artists, the writers, the letterers, the colorists, they never signed their name. And nobody most of the time knew who wrote or drew a story. There was the story in the comic book, and that was it. So I decided to give credit to the writer, the artist, and so forth. And then I thought, that's kind of dull. I thought if I give them little nicknames too, it would make the kids remember them and make it a fun thing. So I called Jack Kirby Jack King Kirby, and Steve Ditko Sturdy Stevie Ditko. He hated that. I called John Romita Jazzy John. He hated that too. Or John Ringading Romita. Anything that came to mind. And most of them hated it. But it stuck in the readers' minds, and the readers began to get to know these guys and care about them. And just like in the movies, they started having favorite artists and favorite writers and so forth, and they would discuss it. And I liked that very much.